The views expressed on the Nova Society are those of the panelists and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Phoenix Research Institute or any institution which any panel member is associated.
Welcome back to the Nova Society. I'm your host, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, and I'm here with my panel, Dr. Scott Gershwer and Dr. Mark Bound. Today we will be answering from Brandon, who lives in London, England. And Brandon asks, I know this must be a hot topic. Yes, you are correct, Brandon. The U.S. bombed Iran. I don't think anyone doesn't know that. But I wanted to get the panel's take on why the U.S. went this alone. None of the U.S. allies seem to know anything about this beforehand. Was this on purpose? And if so, what was the purpose? That's an excellent question, Brandon. Mark, Scott?
Thank you, Brandon.
Absolutely. That is a good question. And I really, really do wish I had a really good answer for it. It does seem very strange. And again, we have not heard from other countries, directly, but by some of the statements made by the leaders of these other countries, it does appear they had no idea. This was kind of like out of the blue. I kind of almost wonder if Israel knew this was happening. So, yeah, it's not the coalition kind of attitude that like the Bushes had, like Obama had, the coalition building kind of thing that, former presidents have always really sought since the end of World War II, actually during World War II and the end of World War II. And it really makes me wonder, why would you not tell anyone unless this was a knee-jerk reaction? And I just, everything about it tells me that it was a knee-jerk reaction. We talked about it in the last segment. You always have to be able to anticipate what possibly the consequences are going to be to the actions you take. And I have not heard one single word out of the administration that they took that into consideration. They want to be able to say, hey, look, we totally destroyed Iran's nuclear capability, which at this point in time, even the Department of Defense is calling into question. So it really is. Like I said, I wish I had a really good answer to that question. You would think in the past, administrations do contact our allies, let them know what's going to happen so they too can be prepared. But as I say, it appears from everything that we're hearing out of England, out of Germany, out of France, out of our main allies, this was something they did not see coming. They were not pre-informed, which that probably made the NATO meeting very interesting. This is all I can say, because, they may have been sitting there saying, what in the hell, you couldn't tell us this was what you were going to do. So it's a great question. Absolutely a great question. And I wish I could tell you. And I'm sure, because you're from London, England, I'm sure that your prime minister was as surprised when he woke up and heard about it as everybody else was.
Yeah, probably.
I think if I might, Scott, sorry, I think that this is, and Brandon, it's a great question, as Mark said. I think this is typical Trump. Look at what he did with the tariffs. Just, this is what I'm going to do. And everybody in the world finds out that this suddenly is happening. Apparently, none of the Democrats in Congress knew. People were finding out via Twitter. Mike Johnson didn't even bother to call people to let them know. No one was consulted. And when Trump said 2 weeks, Friday, he already knew apparently he was going to do this the next day, which also has, as you said, Mark, negative consequences, because it again looks, Trump, obviously what he says cannot be relied upon. And one of the negative consequences potentially that we will not know about is whether the Iranians will now be encouraged to do what the North Koreans did, which is simply make a beeline to go ahead and develop a bomb as quickly as possible in order to prevent bombings in the future. The first thing Trump says, he's going to give people 2 weeks and he wants people to come back to the table. And the next thing you know, while at the same time he's saying everybody needs to evacuate Tehran. And then the next thing you know, there's bombs falling. So if I were the Iranians, I would not be, a person can't trust anything that Trump says, which has already been amply proven throughout Trump's lifetime. through his behaviors, as opposed to what he says and what he promises. He cannot be trusted. I would think that they would be prudent to protect themselves.
Normally, the normal way our government works is that when you're going to do something like this, it's the Gang of Eight. Normally, that's what you would expect. That's not what we're seeing. We have no confirmation from the Gang of Eight that they were consulted on this. And again, I understand that, Adam Schiff was in there complaining about that the entire Congress was not informed. But there's been a lot of cases where the entire Congress was not informed, but it was just the Gang of Eight, and it was the Gang of Eight's responsibility to go back and inform the rest of the Congress. So that's the other thing that kind of gets me. That is totally against the norm of how our government has worked for so many years, that there has to be an inclusion. This is not just one man's decision. It cannot be one man's decision. And I saw a news report that came out of Fox saying, well, yeah, Obama bombed this and Obama bombed that. But the Gang of Eight in each one of those instances was consulted or was at least informed. And I think that's the thing that really makes me see that this new way that the Trump administration works is basically to do things unilaterally, and you'll figure it out by a truth coming off of Truth Social or something coming out on X. And that no government can work that way. The United States is too large and too powerful of a country to be in the hands of one person. It has to be a collaboration. And I just don't see it. And that's the thing that really concerns me about this whole thing.
Yeah, to Brandon, I'll say this. Trump has always said that it's America first. America's going to decide. He's going to decide. I compare this to the way he ran his business. And he ran his businesses into the ground for the most part. But he ran his businesses the way he wanted to run them. And he had people around him that were taking orders and carrying out his orders and doing what he wanted to do. He's not a very smart man. He's got a kind of animal cunning to him, but he's not a very smart man at all. And it's a little frightening that he gets to make these decisions on his own without consulting, as Mark said, the Gang of Eight, or what Kennedy put together with XCOM during the Cuban Missile Crisis, what George H.W. Bush put together when it came to kicking Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait, et cetera, et cetera. Where there's many examples of American presidents putting together teams of trusted advisors, sometimes working well, and other times, as with LBJ and his best and brightest, which, by the way, is sarcastic, that led us into Vietnam. So, but here we are. We have an American president who doesn't listen to other people. He doesn't listen to his own intelligence, right? His own intelligence people tell him something, and he goes, "No, they're wrong. I know what's going on." And now he continues to say he's speaking to Vladimir Putin, and he keeps calling him Vladimir as if they're friends, which is another kind of frightening thing going on in the world right now. That Trump actually thinks that Vladimir Putin is on his side. Just crazy stuff. But I've been reading a book by Admiral William McRaven, who's a former Navy SEAL and a military leader. He wrote a book way back in 2017 called "Make Your Bed: The Little Things That You Can Do to Change Your Life and Maybe the World." And his new book is about leadership through crises. And one of the things he talks about is a council of colonels. You need to get a council of colonels together. It's apparently a military term of art. And you need to put your council of colonels together and listen to what they say, have them go out and find out what they can about the situation that they're in, planning ahead, gaming things out, et cetera, et cetera. Trump does none of that. He did none of that in this case. And it gets even worse, which we'll talk about later in another podcast. It really does get even worse than you think. But for now, let's just say that he made this decision unilaterally. As I said earlier, Bibi Netanyahu's been trying to get American presidents to bomb Iran probably for 30 years now and has been unsuccessful until now. We dropped 12 bunker buster bombs. Anybody who didn't see it coming is asleep at the wheel. In his first term, and I think I pointed this out on one of our earlier podcasts, he bombed a cave complex in Afghanistan with an even bigger bomb than this one. He only had to drop one of them. It's called the Moab, the mother of all bombs. It is the largest bomb outside of the nuclear bombs that we have. The Moab is the most powerful bomb in the world outside of nuclear bombs. And he dropped it on a cave complex. The Moab cost something like $170 million to make and to drop. And he dropped it. In April, I believe, he became president in January of 2017. He dropped this in April of 2017. He killed 35 people with this bomb. 35 people that he claimed were terrorists, and they may have been. I have no idea. I don't know how we'll ever know who they were, if there's ever a way to verify that. But can you imagine? And in this operation, he did something sort of similar. He dropped these 12 bombs on a site that is buried 300 feet in the ground. These bombs reached 200 feet in the ground. He missed it by that much. They're going to have to go again. They're going to have to drop more of them into those holes to get deeper down. You know, I don't know when that's going to happen, but I don't doubt that it's going to happen, that this is not over by a long shot. All the intelligence seem to indicate that he missed, that because he is who he is, the Iranians figured we better get our stuff out of there, and they did. Trump claimed that it would be way too dangerous for them to go down there, that stuff out, and besides, it's really heavy and hard to move out. Ernest Moniz, who was the energy secretary under Obama, who helped craft the JPCOA, said today in a podcast that it's just a matter of getting some trucks down there, loading the stuff up and moving it out. And they did that. They knew it was coming, and they did that. So their program is intact. As I said in our podcasts that we recorded last week, the order of operations here is, in my mind, wrong. Iran is run by an unpopular regime, an unpopular man who makes unpopular decisions, who has already executed, I think they've rounded up something like 300 people suspected of being Israeli spies, and 6 of them have already been hanged for being Israeli spies. These are people who were in prison already in Iran. I don't know how they were able to spy for Israel from that position, but that's what this guy does. But there are good ways to get rid of something and bad ways to get rid of something. And if you can't really verify that you've destroyed it, and we can't, and in fact, we don't think we did, then maybe the diplomacy was the better way. And this was all for nothing. But it made a big bang, and it made a big explosion. And I'm sure at some point we'll start seeing footage of this when it's okay for us to see it. And Trump will talk about how we killed them like dogs, like he always does. And, we'll continue to lie and be believed by the people who believe in him. And this is why he did this. He did not care about what his vice president thought, his secretary of state, his secretary of defense. He didn't care about any of that. He didn't care what Congress thought. He didn't care what the Gang of Eight thought. He wouldn't have cared what anybody thinks, Prime Minister Starmer or Macron or anybody else. He doesn't care. The only person he seems to care about is Putin. And he probably thinks that he's having a good chuckle with Putin. Who even knows who is on the other side of that phone when he's talking to Vladimir? I mean, it's really just so upsetting and crazy that he continues to talk about Vladimir Putin as if they're best buddies. So
Yeah.
So I hope that answers the question, at least from my perspective. This is not a good situation. It is not how presidents are supposed to operate. He's a different kind of president. And this is all just a prelude to him turning that military on us, the American people, before too long.
When we teach courses, the three of us, I think the three of us have the same attitude that to get the best answer, you have to have different perspectives. It cannot be just one person's perspective. And that's the point I was trying to make when it came to generally, a president of the United States does not make these decisions unilaterally. Yes, they are the final decision maker. There is no doubt about that. That is the way our government is set up. However, they seek opinions from not only the people that are the yes men, they also seek opinions from people that may be opposed to them so that they understand. We work with our allies. So, Brandon from London, I can't tell you why England, who is a staunch ally of the United States, was not consulted before this. Maybe it'll come out that they were. However, your prime minister seems to make no indication that this was actually the case. So, and I totally agree with Scott. This is not the way the United States in the past has worked. Unfortunately, it is the way the United States today works, and that truly is unfortunate. So, yeah, I hope we did answer that question.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, Mark, to your point where presidents should solicit different perspectives. That's something that Lyndon Baines at Johnson LBJ did not do, and that's what groupthink is all about. And when people in his administration, like George Ball, I believe it was, did finally venture a different perspective on Vietnam, like maybe we shouldn't be doing this, maybe we should stop, that person was ostracized and marginalized. And like there's a famous study, the Ash Lines study, that shows that people will tend to change their views to be that of the group, rather than being the only person with an independent perspective. Trump, not only does he have yes people, but he has people who owe him fealty. I mean, it has to be 100% loyalty. There cannot be a single point of disagreement on anything ever, or the individual suddenly becomes scum and becomes non-MAGA. I mean, that's the message now to MAGA, is that if you don't support the bombing of Iran, you are not now, and you never were, a true MAGA. Then, Brandon, thank you for the question. I hope we answered your question. We all wanted to thank you, our listeners, for spending some time with us, and we'd like to thank all of our subscribers as well for your continued support. We do appreciate that. Keep those emails coming, and we will see you again next time on the Nova Society.
The Nova Society is a production of Nova Society Media, a division of the Phoenix Research Institute. We'd like to thank our production partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, our editing partners, Apple iTunes, the largest source of podcasts and music on the internet, Spotify, the most popular platform for the Nova Society, and iHeartRadio, your source for all things music and podcasting. The Nova Society is available on all of these and other quality platforms listed in our description. We'd also like to thank all of our listeners. Without your support, the Nova Society would not be possible. If you have a question or comment, we can be reached at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. So for Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, Dr. Scott Gershwer, and all of our production partners here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Remember, the true power in society is knowledge. Thanks for listening, and we will see you again next time.
Hi, everyone. This is JJ, the co-founder of Good Pods. If you haven't heard of it yet, Good Pods is like Goodreads or Instagram, but for podcasts. It's new, it's social, it's different, and it's growing really fast. There are more than 2 million podcasts, and we know that it is impossible to figure out what to listen to. On Good Pods, you follow your friends and podcasters to see what they like. That is the #1 way to discover new shows and episodes. You can find Good Pods on the web or download the app. Happy listening!